Number 1. Einar. We begin our descent into the dark and violent underworld of contract killings not in the cartel-ravaged streets of Mexico or the gang-controlled neighborhoods of Los Angeles, but in the freezing, pristine capital of Stockholm, Sweden. To the outside world, Sweden is a utopia of safety, social welfare, and peace. But beneath the surface of the cobblestone streets and the modern architecture lies a brutal, festering war that has turned the country into the gun violence capital of Europe. The victim at the center of this tragedy was not a hardened career criminal in his 40s. He was a child of the spotlight, a teenage prodigy who became the most streamed artist in his country before he was old enough to legally buy alcohol. His name was Nils Kurt Erik Einar Gronberg, known to millions simply as Einár. He was the Justin Bieber of the ghettos, a boy with an angelic face and a flow that spoke of automatic weapons, drug deals, and a life he was living too fast. But unlike many studio gangsters who rap about a life they don't live, Einár was deeply entrenched in the conflict he rhymed about. He was a pawn in a deadly game of chess between rival criminal networks, a game where fame does not protect you, it only makes you a brighter target. This is the harrowing, infuriating, and heartbreaking story of a 19-year-old superstar who was hunted down, cornered in a bike shed, and executed by professional hitmen in a cold-blooded contract hit that shattered the illusion of Scandinavian innocence forever. To understand why a teenager was executed with military precision, we have to rewind to an event that happened a year before his death, an event that served as the psychological precursor to his murder. In April 2020, Einár was not killed, but he was destroyed. He was lured into a trap by a rival gang known as the Vorben Networket. This wasn't a chance encounter, it was a coordinated operation. They kidnapped the rapper. For hours they held him captive in an apartment. They robbed him of his Rolex watch and his gold chains, stripping him of his status symbols. But they didn't stop at robbery. They wanted to dismantle his soul. They forced him to put on women's lingerie, a humiliating act designed to strip him of his masculinity in the hyper-masculine world of street rap. They put a wig on him, they tied him up, and then they took photos. These photos were posted on Instagram, broadcast to his hundreds of thousands of followers. It was a digital execution. The message was clear: we can touch you, we can break you, you are nothing. This leads us to a complex question about the psychology of humiliation in the digital age. The gang didn't just want his money, they wanted to destroy his image. I want to ask you, do you believe that the public humiliation of a person is a form of violence that is equal to, or perhaps worse than, physical assault? In the world of rap and street credibility, was this Instagram post essentially a death warrant because it left him with no choice but to retaliate or die trying to regain his honor? Let me know your thoughts on the weaponization of social media. Einár survived the kidnapping, but he was a dead man walking. The police eventually cracked the encrypted EncroChat phones used by the gang and arrested the kidnappers, sentencing them to prison. But in the underworld, going to the police, even if you were the victim, is the ultimate sin. Einár was labeled a snitch by his enemies, even though he refused to cooperate with the authorities during the trial. He was stuck in a terrifying limbo. He was too famous to hide, but too involved to be safe. He lived with a bounty on his head. There were credible reports that a contract worth over 1 million Swedish kroner had been placed on his life. He moved from safe house to safe house, looking over his shoulder, knowing that the shadows were getting longer. On the night of October 21st, 2021, he was staying in a seemingly secure apartment complex in the upscale district of Hammarby Sjöstad. It is a quiet, family-friendly area, the kind of place where violence feels like a foreign concept. But the killers had done their homework. They knew where he was. They knew his schedule. They were lying in wait. The details of the execution are chilling in their professionalism. Einár and 2 friends entered the apartment building's courtyard shortly before 11 p.m. They were heading to the entrance, but the darkness of the bike shed concealed two figures. These were not random street thugs looking for a fight. These were shooters sent to fulfill a contract. As Einar approached the door, the gunmen stepped out. They didn't spray bullets wildly. They closed the distance. They walked up to within 1.5 meters, less than 5 feet of the 19-year-old rapper. Einar tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The shooters opened fire. He was hit multiple times in the chest and the face. It was an execution-style slaying, designed to ensure there was zero chance of survival. The neighbors reported hearing the sharp cracks of gunfire, followed by the screams of his friends. By the time the police and paramedics arrived, the prodigy of Swedish hip-hop was lying dead on the cold concrete, his life extinguished before he could even reach his 20s. This raises a terrifying question about the age of the perpetrators and victims in modern gang wars. Reports suggest that the shooters themselves may have been barely older than Einar. I want to ask you, when we see teenagers executing other teenagers over gang disputes, is this a failure of the parents, or is it a failure of the society that glamorizes this lifestyle? Do you think the music industry bears any responsibility for promoting the very violence that eventually consumes its biggest stars? Or are the artists simply reflecting the reality they live in? I want to hear your perspective on the cycle of violence. The aftermath of the murder plunged Sweden into a national crisis. The Prime Minister spoke about it. The Cultural Minister wept. But in the streets, the code of silence, omerta, took over. Witnesses were terrified to speak. The surveillance footage showed two dark figures fleeing the scene, vanishing into the night. Theories began to swirl. Was it the Vauban network taking final revenge? Was it a different gang trying to claim the bounty? Or was it a betrayal from within his own circle? The most disturbing theory is that the shooters themselves were later murdered to cut the loose ends, a common tactic in high-level contract killings. Einar's death wasn't just a murder, it was a professional cleaning operation. He was erased because he had become a liability, a symbol of a conflict that had spiraled out of control. I want to ask you about the code of silence. In cases like this, where dozens of people likely know who ordered the hit, no one speaks because they fear death. Do you believe that the police can ever truly win a war against organized crime when fear is stronger motivator than justice? If you were a witness to such a high-profile cartel hit, would you risk your family's life to testify, or would you stay silent to survive? Einar's music has taken on a haunting quality since that night. In his songs, he often spoke about death, about enemies, about the paranoia of the streets. He rapped about wearing bulletproof vests and trusting no one. Like Tupac or Biggie, he wrote his own eulogy. But the tragedy of Einar is his youth. He was a child soldier in a war he didn't start, but was forced to finish. He had the talent to conquer the world, to leave the streets behind, but the streets have a gravitational pull that is hard to escape. The contract on his head was absolute. It didn't matter how many streams he had, how much money he made, or how many fans loved him. To the person who signed the check, he was just a problem to be solved with a bullet. This brings up a question about the illusion of safety for celebrities. Einar was living in a wealthy, safe neighborhood when he was killed. Do you think that fame actually makes you safer because of the resources you have, or does it make you a trophy kill for criminals looking to make a name for themselves? Is it possible for a person with deep street ties to ever truly leave that life behind, or does the past always catch up? Today, candles still burn at the site of his murder in Hammarby Sjöstad. Fans leave flowers, letters, and teddy bears. But the justice system has struggled to provide closure. The execution of Einar stands as a grim monument to the new reality of Europe, where gang violence is executed with military precision and artists are hunted like prey. He was the boy king of Swedish rap, a shooting star that was shot down. If this chilling story of the teenage superstar executed by professional hitmen left you stunned, please hit the like button. Share this video to expose the brutal reality behind the glamorous world of music, and make sure you are subscribed for part 2, where we will travel to the Hollywood Hills to uncover the story of the King of New York Drill, a 20-year-old rising star whose location was leaked by a simple Instagram mistake, leading to 4 masked hitmen to his doorstep in a robbery gone wrong that felt suspiciously like an assassination. This is the story of the smoke that ultimately cleared to reveal a tragedy. Number 2. Pop Smoke. We leave the freezing darkness of Sweden and travel to the glittering, star-studded canyons of the Hollywood Hills in Los Angeles, California. The year is 2020. This story takes us into the heart of the modern American dream and how quickly that dream can turn into a nightmare when you forget that the wolves are always watching. Bashar Baraka Jackson, known to the world as Pop Smoke, was not just a rapper, he was a phenomenon. He was the king of New York drill, a 20-year-old with a voice so deep and gravelly it sounded like thunder trapped in a bottle. In less than a year, he had gone from the rough streets of Canarsie, Brooklyn, to renting a luxury mansion owned by a Real Housewives star in the most exclusive zip code in America. He was living the life every kid from the hood dreams of. He had the cars, the jewelry, the fame, and the future. But Pop Smoke made one fatal error. He forgot that in the age of social media, privacy is the only armor that matters. He didn't predict his death in a song like Tupac, nor was he hunted by a cartel like the others we will discuss. Instead, he was killed by a 15-second Instagram story. This is the infuriating and tragic account of a rising superstar who accidentally invited his own killers to his doorstep, turning a celebration of success into a brutal execution that shocked the music industry to its core. To understand the tragedy, you have to look at the seemingly innocent mistake that triggered it. On February 18, 2020, Pop Smoke was having a good day. He had received gift bags from the luxury brand Amiri. Excited, he posted a video of the bags on his Instagram story to show love to the brand. It was a standard flex, something thousands of influencers do every day. But in his excitement, he didn't notice that the shipping label on the bag was visible. For a split second, the address of the rented mansion, 2033 Hercules Drive, was broadcast to his millions of followers. Most fans just saw the clothes, but a group of predators in South Los Angeles saw an opportunity. They didn't see a rapper. They saw a sweet lick, a target loaded with cash and jewelry, staying in a house that wasn't his, likely without heavy security. They took a screenshot of the address. The clock started ticking. It is a terrifying reminder that the internet never forgets, and the wrong eyes are always watching. This leads us to a critical question about the responsibility of social media. Pop Smoke was young, excited, and just living his life. I want to ask you, do you blame him for the oversight, or do you think this highlights a terrifying reality where victims are blamed for simply existing online? In a world where we document everything, have we lost the instinct for self-preservation? Furthermore, does the luxury brand or his management bear any responsibility for not warning him about security protocols? Or was this simply a tragic, unpreventable slip-up? I want to hear your thoughts on the price of flexing online. The events of February 19, 2020 played out like a horror movie. At around 4:30 a.m., while the Hollywood Hills were shrouded in fog and silence, 4 hooded figures approached the mansion. They weren't stealthy ninjas, they were brazen. They climbed the second-story balcony. Pop Smoke was in the shower, or perhaps just getting out, unaware that his sanctuary had been breached. The intruders confronted him. This wasn't a simple hands-up robbery. It turned violent instantly. They pistol-whipped him, and then they shot him 3 times in the back. As he lay on the floor, bleeding out, the killers didn't raid a safe or steal millions of dollars in art. They kicked him while he was down, a final act of disrespect, and stole his Rolex watch. That was it. They sold the watch later for a measly $2,000. The life of the most promising rapper of his generation was extinguished for a sum of money that wouldn't even buy a used car. The sheer senselessness of the trade-off, a human life for a watch, is what makes this case so nauseating. This raises a disturbing question about the nature of youth violence. When the killers were finally caught months later, the world was shocked to learn their ages. They weren't seasoned mafia hitmen. They were teenagers. The youngest, the one who allegedly pulled the trigger, was only 15 years old. I want to ask you, what does it say about society when a 15-year-old is capable of executing a stranger for a piece of jewelry? Is this a failure of the justice system, the education system, or the culture itself? Do you believe that a 15-year-old shooter should be tried as an adult and face life in prison, or is he also a victim of his environment? Let me know your verdict on juvenile justice in extreme crimes. The investigation revealed that this might have been more than just a robbery gone wrong. It had the energy of an assassination. The killers specifically targeted him. They didn't just take the watch and run. They engaged him, beat him, and shot him when he was defenseless. In the rap world, this is often called checking in, the idea that you cannot come to a new city, LA, and flaunt your wealth without paying respect or tribute to the local gangs. Pop Smoke was from Brooklyn. He was on foreign soil. Some theories suggest that the robbery was just an excuse, and the real motive was jealousy and territorial aggression. The crabs-in-a-bucket mentality meant that seeing a young black man succeed made him a target for others who felt left behind. I want to ask you a question about the culture of jealousy. Pop Smoke was killed by people who looked like him, who came from similar backgrounds. Why is it that when someone finally escapes the struggle, they often become the primary target of the people still in it? Is envy the most dangerous emotion in the world? How can artists protect themselves from the very communities they represent without losing their connection to the streets? The death of Pop Smoke left a void in the music industry that is yet to be filled. His debut album, Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon, was released posthumously and broke records. It was executive produced by 50 Cent, who saw Pop as a younger version of himself. The album showed that Pop wasn't just a drill rapper, he was a melodist, a superstar in the making who could sing R&B and make club hits. Listening to tracks like Dior or The Woo now is a bittersweet experience. You are listening to a ghost who had barely scratched the surface of his potential. He had the charisma, the look, and the sound to run the decade. Instead, he became a legend in the tragic sense, forever young, forever 20, forever frozen in that moment before the gunshots rang out. This brings up a question about posthumous legacies. Pop Smoke became significantly more famous after his death. His estate released multiple albums and his voice is everywhere. Do you feel that the music industry exploits the death of young artists to maximize profits? Or is this the best way to honor their memory and ensure their families are taken care of? Does the music hit differently when you know the artist died over a $2,000 watch? Pop Smoke's story is a modern cautionary tale. It taught an entire generation of influencers and rappers that the location tag on Instagram is a homing beacon for predators. It changed how celebrities move. Security teams now sweep social media posts before they go live. But for Pop, the lesson came too late. He was the wolf of the drill scene who was caught sleeping by the hyenas. He proved that you can leave the hood, you can buy the mansion, and you can hire the guards, but you can never truly outrun the envy of the world if you leave the back door unlocked. If this infuriating story of the Hollywood Hills trap that claimed a king left you questioning the price of fame, please hit the like button. Share this video to remind everyone that privacy is power. And make sure you are subscribed for part 3, where we will travel to the dangerous borderlands of Mexico to uncover the story of Tito Torbellino, a Banda superstar who was enjoying a simple lunch in a restaurant when 6 gunmen walked in, locked the doors, and executed him in daylight while the other diners watched in horror. This is the meal that became a massacre. Number 3. Tito Torbellino. We cross the border, leaving the glitz of Hollywood behind, and descend into the sun-scorched, danger-filled streets of Ciudad Obregón in the state of Sonora, Mexico. The year is 2014. This story takes us into the heart of a genre of music that is arguably the most dangerous in the world, the narco corrido. In the United States, rappers might feud over territory or clout, But in Mexico, singers who praise the exploits of drug lords are playing a game of Russian roulette with fully loaded chambers. Tomás Tovar Rascón, known to the world as Tito Torbellino, was a titan of this genre. Born in Phoenix, Arizona, he was an American citizen who found massive fame south of the border. He sang ballads about the dangerous men who run the underworld, about the lifestyle of the cartels and the code of honor among thieves. He was a man who straddled two worlds, the safety of the United States and the lethal volatility of Mexico. But on a bright Thursday afternoon, Tito made a fatal miscalculation. He believed that his fame, his accordion, and his American passport would shield him from the violence he sang about. He was wrong. This is the terrifying, cinematic account of a simple lunch meeting that turned into a scene from a mob movie where a restaurant was seized, doors were locked, and a superstar was executed in front of a room full of horrified diners. To understand why a singer would be targeted with such military precision, you have to understand the specific weight of his lyrics. Tito Torbellino didn't just sing love songs, he sang stories that often glorified specific figures in the drug trade. In the complex geopolitical map of the Mexican cartels, praising one boss is often interpreted as a declaration of war against his rival. If you sing for the Sinaloa cartel in a territory controlled by the Beltran Leyva organization, you are not just a musician, you are an enemy propagandist. Tito had built a career on this razor's edge. He was known for his skilled accordion playing and his fearless attitude. He traveled with an entourage, he lived the high life, but Ciudad Obregón is a place where the shadows have eyes. On May 29, 2014, Tito was scheduled to perform a sold-out concert at a local palenque. He arrived in the city early to do press and relax. He decided to grab a bite to eat at a popular establishment, the Red Chili restaurant. It was supposed to be a casual meal with friends, a moment of calm before the storm of the show. He didn't know that the restaurant had already been marked as his slaughterhouse. The events that unfolded inside the Red Chili restaurant are the stuff of nightmares because of how methodical they were. It wasn't a drive-by shooting where bullets fly randomly, it was a takeover. At around 3 p.m., while families were eating and waiters were serving drinks, 2 vehicles pulled up abruptly outside. 6 men stepped out. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces set with a terrifying purpose. They weren't there to rob the cash register. They split into 2 teams. One group secured the perimeter and the entrance, effectively locking the doors and ensuring no one could leave or enter. The other group, armed with 9mm pistols, walked straight to the table where Tito was sitting. Imagine the terror of that moment. You are eating lunch, laughing with friends, and suddenly the room goes silent. You look up to see armed men walking toward you, ignoring everyone else, their eyes fixed solely on your chest. There were no words exchanged. There was no negotiation. The gunman opened fire at close range. Tito was hit 6 times in the chest and head. He slumped over the table, his lunch unfinished, his life ending amidst the screams of patrons diving under tables. This leads us to a chilling question about the price of authenticity. Tito sang about violence to entertain, but the violence he sang about eventually consumed him. I want to ask you, do you believe that artists who glorify criminal lifestyles are partially responsible for their own fate when that lifestyle comes knocking? Is there a line between documenting a culture and becoming a participant in it? Furthermore, Tito was an American citizen. He could have stayed in Phoenix and lived a long, safe life. Was the lure of fame and respect in Mexico worth the ultimate price, or was he naive to think he could play with fire without getting burned? I want to hear your thoughts on the deadly intersection of art and crime. The aftermath of the shooting was chaos. The gunmen didn't run away in a panic. They walked out, got back into their vehicles, and vanished into the city traffic. It was a professional hit, executed with the confidence of men who knew the police wouldn't catch them. Tito was still breathing when the paramedics arrived, but barely. He was rushed to a local hospital, but the damage was catastrophic. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. He was 33 years old. The concert he was supposed to play that night never happened. Instead, the venue became a gathering place for mourning fans who couldn't believe that the voice of the streets was silenced by the streets. The police investigation yielded little. In cases like this, witnesses often develop sudden amnesia out of fear. No one wants to be the person who points a finger at a cartel hit squad. The murder remains officially unsolved, a cold case file gathering dust in a system overwhelmed by violence. This brings up a disturbing question about the normalization of violence. The other diners in the restaurant witnessed a brutal execution and then had to go home to their families. I want to ask you, how does a society function when a lunch date can turn into a massacre? Does this kind of public violence create a culture of fear that silences everyone, or does it make the music even more popular because it proves the stakes are real? Do fans listen to Tito's music differently now, knowing that the stories he told were real enough to get him killed? Tito's body was transported back to the United States for burial. His funeral in Phoenix was attended by thousands. It was a hero send-off, but the irony is bitter. He was safe in the U.S., but his heart and his art were in Mexico. He was a pocho, a Mexican-American who died trying to be the king of the South. His death sent a shockwave through the regional Mexican music industry. Other singers canceled tours, security details were beefed up, but the narco corridos didn't stop. If anything, they became more popular. The blood of the singer watered the roots of the genre. It proved that this wasn't just entertainment, it was a war report set to a polka rhythm. I want to ask you about the motive. While no group claimed responsibility, it is widely believed Tito was killed for performing in the wrong territory or singing the wrong song. Do you think a song is ever worth dying for? Is the freedom of speech absolute, or should artists in war zones self-censor to survive? If you knew that singing a certain lyric could get you killed, would you still sing it to maintain your integrity, or would you fold? Let me know your verdict on the cost of courage. The Red Chili restaurant eventually reopened, but the stain of that day remains. It is a reminder that in the world of the cartels, there are no neutral zones. A restaurant, a church, a hospital, any place can become a crime scene if the target is there. Tito Torbellino thought he was just a singer, an observer of the game, but the men with the guns saw him as a player, and in their game, when you lose, you don't just lose your turn, you lose everything. He left behind a wife, children, and a legacy of songs that now sound like warnings from the grave. Finally, consider the method. Locking the doors, trapping the victim, it sends a message of total control. I want to ask you, does this level of brazenness prove that the cartels fear no one, not even the government? When a group can take over a public space in broad daylight and execute a celebrity, does it signify a failed state? How can art survive in an environment where the critics carry AK-47s? Tito Torbellino's story is a tragic corridor of fame and bullets. He wanted to be a legend, and he became one, but not in the way he planned. He became a martyr of the accordion, a man who learned too late that you cannot dance with the devil and expect him not to step on your toes. If this terrifying story of the Lunchtime massacre that silenced a superstar left you stunned, please hit the like button. Share this video to show the world the real cost of the narco corrido lifestyle. And make sure you are subscribed for Part 4, where we will travel to the skies above Mexico to uncover the mysterious crash of Jenni Rivera.
This is the story of the Diva of Banda, whose private jet plummeted from 28,000 feet in a nosedive that many believe was not an accident, but a sabotage ordered by a drug lord she refused to obey. This is the story of the butterfly that fell from the sky.
Number 4. Jenni Rivera. We leave the blood-soaked floors of the Red Chili restaurant and ascend into the cold, thin air above the Sierra Madre Oriental Mountains. The year is 2012. This story shifts the focus from the brazen public executions of street-level hits to the terrifying, invisible world of high-altitude sabotage. Jenni Rivera was not just a singer, she was a force of nature. Known as La Diva de la Banda, she was the most successful female figure in a male-dominated genre, a Mexican-American superstar born in Long Beach who conquered the hearts of millions with her songs about heartbreak, resilience, and female empowerment. She was a mother, a grandmother, and a mogul. But on a dark December night, her empire crumbled in seconds. While the official reports labeled her death a tragic accident caused by an aging plane and a tired pilot, the underworld tells a different story. It is a story of a contract hit ordered not by a rival singer, but by a drug lord who felt disrespected. It is the story of a private jet that didn't just crash, it fell from the sky like a stone, disintegrating upon impact, fueling the darkest rumor in Latin music history, that the accident was actually a sophisticated assassination designed to leave no witnesses and no evidence. To understand the magnitude of this loss, you have to look at the final hours of her life. On December 8, 2012, Jenni performed a sold-out concert at the Monterey Arena. The atmosphere was electric. She sang for 4 hours, pouring her soul out to 17,000 fans. It was a triumphant night. At the press conference afterward, she seemed reflective, telling reporters, "I feel like I am unshakable." At 3 a.m., she boarded a Learjet 25 with her publicist, her lawyer, her makeup artist, and the flight crew. They were headed to Toluca. They took a final photo together on the plane, smiling, happy, unaware that they were sitting in a flying coffin. 10 minutes after takeoff, the plane reached an altitude of 28,000 feet. Then, in a moment that defies the laws of normal aviation failures, the plane went into a sudden vertical nosedive. It didn't glide, it dropped. It plummeted at a speed exceeding 600 miles per hour, shattering the sound barrier before slamming into the rugged terrain near Iturbide. The impact was so violent that the wreckage was spread over a vast area. There was no fuselage left. There were no bodies to recover in the traditional sense, only fragments of clothing and DNA. The Diva of Banda had been obliterated. This leads us to the terrifying theory of sabotage. In the years following the crash, a chilling narrative emerged involving the notorious cartel figure Edgar Valdez Villarreal, known as La Barbie. Reports and alleged confessions surfaced, suggesting that Jenni had been ordered to launder money or perform for the cartel and had refused. In the world of the cartels, no is not an acceptable answer. The theory posits that an explosive device was placed on the plane or the controls were tampered with to cause a catastrophic failure at cruising altitude. I want to ask you, do you believe that a mechanical failure can explain a vertical nosedive of a plane that was flying smoothly seconds before? Does the sheer violence of the crash suggest an intentional act to ensure total destruction, or was it simply a tragic malfunction of a 43-year-old aircraft? I want to hear your thoughts on the physics of the crash versus the theory of the bomb. The official investigation by Mexican and American authorities blamed a loss of control due to undetermined causes, citing the age of the pilot, who was 78, and the age of the plane. But for the fans, this explanation felt hollow. The shadow of La Barbie looms large. There were rumors that Jenni had received death threats prior to the concert, that she was advised not to go to Monterey. During her final concert, some fans claim she shouted "Today I Die" during a song, though this is debated as a misinterpretation of emotional lyrics.
However, the timing is suspicious. She was a powerful woman who walked in circles that often intersected with dangerous men. If she stood her ground against a cartel demand, she would have become a high-value target. Sabotaging a plane is the ultimate clean hit. It looks like an accident, it destroys the evidence, and it sends a message to anyone else who thinks they are untouchable. I want to ask you a question about the intersection of fame and organized crime. In Mexico, many artists are forced to attend private parties for cartel leaders. If they refuse, they risk death. If they agree, they risk their reputation and legal standing. Is it fair to judge these artists for their connections when the alternative is a bullet? Was Jenni Rivera a victim of her own integrity, a woman who died because she refused to bow down to a criminal organization? Let me know your perspective on the impossible choice these singers face. The recovery of the crash site was a scene of horror. First responders found a driving license, a shoe, and a dress hanging from a tree branch. It was a scene of total devastation. The lack of a body to bury traumatized the family and the fans. It denied them the closure of a final look. It also fueled the conspiracy theories that perhaps she wasn't on the plane, that she had been kidnapped or is in witness protection, the Elvis Presley syndrome of Latin America. But the grim reality of the DNA tests confirmed the tragedy. The Rivera family, Chiquis, Lupillo, and the others were left to pick up the pieces of an empire that lost its queen overnight. They have largely avoided endorsing the assassination theories publicly, perhaps to protect themselves, or perhaps because the truth is too painful to accept. This brings up a question about the La Barbie confession. The drug lord allegedly took the credit in private circles. Do you trust the word of a criminal who might just be seeking clout, or does his reputation for brutality make the claim credible? Why would a drug boss want to kill a beloved singer in such a spectacular way, unless it was to prove that he could touch the sky itself? Jenni's legacy has only grown since 2012. Her music is played at every party, her reality shows are still watched, and her life story has been turned into telenovelas. She represents the American dream with a Mexican heart, a woman who survived domestic abuse, poverty, and scandal to build a fortune, only to lose it all in a random or not-so-random act of violence. If it was a hit, it was one of the most high-profile assassinations in history, executed with a level of sophistication that rivals state intelligence agencies. It turned a Learjet into a weapon. I want to ask you about the safety of private aviation for stars. Many legends, Alalia, Kobe Bryant, Jenni Rivera, died in private aircraft. Do you think these small planes are inherently dangerous, or are they targeted because they are the weak link in a celebrity's security detail? If Jenni had flown commercial that night, would she still be alive, or would the cartels have found another way? Jenni Rivera's story is the most cinematic tragedy on this list. She was the butterfly who flew too high. Whether it was a mechanical failure or a bomb, the result is the same. The world lost a voice that spoke for the broken and the brave. She died as she lived, in the fast lane, surrounded by controversy, leaving behind a mystery that may never be fully solved. If this terrifying account of the nosedive that silenced the Diva of Banda left you questioning the official story, please hit the like button. Share this video to keep the investigation alive, and make sure you are subscribed for Part 5, where we will travel to the dangerous highways of Sinaloa to uncover the story of Sergio Vega, known as El Shaka. This is the singer who, just hours after denying rumors of his own death, was chased down a highway by a hit squad in a red Cadillac, leading to a high-speed pursuit that ended in a hail of bullets and a final brutal confirmation that the rumors were premature, but the threat was real. This is the story of the man who raced death and lost.
Number 5. Sergio Vega. We descend from the tragic skies of Iturbide and land on the scorching, sun-baked asphalt of Federal Highway 15 in the state of Sinaloa, Mexico. The year's 2010. This story is perhaps the most psychologically twisting case on our list because it involves a phenomenon that feels like a glitch in the matrix, the pre-mortem denial. Sergio Vega, known affectionately to his millions of fans as El Shaka, was a titan of the grupero and banda music scenes. He was a man who sang with a swagger and a smile, a performer who seemed larger than life. But in the violent ecosystem of the Mexican drug war, fame is often a beacon for predators. On a fateful Saturday in June, Sergio Vega found himself trapped in a surreal nightmare. Rumors of his violent murder began to circulate wildly on the internet and news blogs. Fans were mourning him while he was still eating breakfast. In a move to calm the hysteria, Sergio gave an interview just hours before his death, explicitly stating that he was alive, that the rumors were false, and that he had increased his security. He laughed it off. He thought he had debunked the lie. But the hit squad waiting for him on the highway had other plans. They intended to turn the rumor into a reality before the sun went down. This is the terrifying, high-octane story of a man who raced against his own obituary in a red Cadillac, only to find that the finish line was a trap set by men who never miss. To understand the sheer horror of this event, you have to contextualize the atmosphere of Mexico in 2010. It was a time when musicians were being hunted for sport, often for singing the wrong lyrics or performing in the wrong territory. Sergio Vega was aware of this. Just hours before his murder, he spoke to the entertainment website La Oreja. He said, "It's happened to me for years now. Someone tells a radio station or a newspaper I've been killed or suffered an accident, and then I have to call my dear mum who has heart trouble to reassure her." He was heading to a concert in the town of Alway. He was driving his prized red Cadillac, a car that was a symbol of his success, but also a bright, unmistakable target on the gray highway. He wasn't traveling with a massive armed convoy. He was traveling with a companion, believing that his public denial of the death rumors proved he had nothing to hide. He believed that by showing his face, he was safe. But the cartels do not care about press releases. They care about orders. And the order that day was to ensure that El Shaka never held a microphone again. This leads us to a chilling question about the weaponization of information. The rumors of his death circulated before the attack. I want to ask you, do you believe that these rumors were a coincidence, or were they a form of psychological warfare launched by the killers to terrorize him before the hit? Is it possible that the hitmen planted the story to see how he would react, or to flush him out into the open? Did Sergio unknowingly seal his fate by going public, giving the killers his location and his status? I want to hear your thoughts on whether the rumor was the trigger for the murder. The chase that unfolded on the highway was straight out of an action movie, but with real blood and real terror. As Sergio drove toward the San Miguel toll booth, a truck began to tail him. These were not fans wanting an autograph. They were armed gunmen. They didn't signal for him to pull over. They opened fire while both vehicles were speeding down the road. Imagine the adrenaline, the panic of seeing muzzle flashes in your rearview mirror while driving a luxury car at 100 miles per hour. Sergio tried to outrun them. He pushed the Cadillac to its limits, but you cannot outrun a bullet. The gunmen sprayed the vehicle with high-caliber rounds. The driver's side was riddled with holes. Sergio, likely hit or trying to take evasive action, lost control of the vehicle. The red Cadillac swerved, crashed through the vegetation, and came to a halt off the side of the road. But the horror didn't end with the crash. In a standard traffic accident, people rush to help. In a cartel hit, the predators circle the prey. The gunmen stopped their truck. They walked down to the wrecked Cadillac to verify the kill. They found Sergio Vega wounded but perhaps still breathing. They finished the job at close range, shooting him in the head and chest, ensuring that this time there would be no interview to deny the news. This brings up a disturbing question about the nature of the chase kill. Unlike a sniper shot or a poisoning, a highway chase is intimate and prolonged. The victim knows they are being hunted for minutes before the end. I want to ask you, do you believe that there is a specific message sent by killing a star in his own car on a public highway? Does it signify that the roads, the very arteries of the country, belong to the cartels, not the citizens?
Furthermore, Sergio drove a bright red Cadillac. Do you think in dangerous environments, flaunting wealth with flashy cars is a death wish? Or should people have the right to enjoy their success without fear of execution? Was the car the thing that gave him away? The aftermath was a grim confirmation of the morning's rumors. Photos of the red Cadillac, shattered and bullet-ridden, circulated globally. The same fans who had breathed a sigh of relief hours ago were now plunged into shock. El Shaka was gone. The irony was suffocating. He had spent his morning telling the world he wasn't dead, and he spent his afternoon dying. The investigation, like so many in Mexico, yielded few results. No specific cartel claimed responsibility immediately, though theories abound that he had refused to pay piso or protection money, or had performed for rival factions without permission. In the narco-corrido world, neutrality is not an option. If you sing for everyone, you are loyal to no one, and that makes you a liability. Sergio Vega had replaced another murdered singer, Sergio Gomez of Que Paz de la Sierra, who was tortured and killed years prior, as a heavy hitter in the industry. It seemed that the position of top singer came with a target on the back. I want to ask you about the legacy of the narco-corrido genre. Sergio Vega sang songs that romanticized the bandit lifestyle. Do you think the genre itself is to blame for the violence against its singers, or are they just storytellers reporting on reality? If you sing about wolves, are you surprised when the wolves come to eat you? Is it possible to separate the art from the danger in a country where the subjects of your songs are the ones holding the guns? Sergio Vega's death marked a turning point. It showed that even the biggest stars could be touched, regardless of their security or their PR teams. It proved that in the drug war, truth is irrelevant. The rumors of his death became a self-fulfilling prophecy. He raced against the news cycle, but the bullets were faster. Today, his songs are still played at parties and in trucks across Mexico, but they carry the weight of that red Cadillac on the side of Highway 15. He is remembered as the man who died twice in one day, once in the media and once in reality. Finally, I want to ask you about the psychological toll on the fans. Imagine being a fan who read he was dead, then saw him on TV saying he was alive, and then saw him dead again by the evening. Do you think this kind of emotional whiplash desensitizes the public to violence? Does it make murder feel less real and more like a TV show plot? How does a society heal when its cultural icons are extinguished with such regularity? Sergio Vega was El Shaka, the fearless one. He died defending his right to exist, driving his own car on his own terms. But he serves as a tragic reminder that in the crosshairs of a contract killer, courage is not a shield. If this high-speed tragedy of the singer who denied his death hours before his execution left you stunned, please hit the like button. Share this video to ensure the story of El Shaka is not forgotten. And make sure you are subscribed for Part 6, where we will travel to the streets of Los Angeles to uncover the story of Nipsey Hussle. This is the story of a community hero who was rebuilding his neighborhood block by block, only to be confronted by a known associate in front of his own clothing store, leading to a senseless, ego-driven execution that was captured on camera and broke the heart of a city. This is the marathon that ended in tragedy.
Number 6. Nipsey Hussle. We leave the dusty highways of Sinaloa and travel to the concrete corners of South Los Angeles, specifically the intersection of Crenshaw Boulevard and Slauson Avenue. The year is 2019. This story is arguably the most heartbreaking on our list because it involves a man who wasn't running from his past, but actively trying to heal it. Ermias Özgedem, known as Nipsey Hussle, was more than just a Grammy-nominated rapper. He was a visionary, a community organizer, and a symbol of black capitalism. He had done what so few do. He made it out of the gang life, became wealthy, and then came back to buy the block. He opened the Marathon clothing store, a smart store that employed people from the neighborhood. He was building STEM centers for kids. He was meeting with the LAPD to stop gang violence. He was the Tupac of his generation, but with a business plan. But on a sunny Sunday afternoon, the very community he was trying to save consumed him. He wasn't killed by a rival gang or a faceless cartel assassin. He was executed by a man he knew, a man from his own set, over a conversation that bruised an ego. This is the devastating story of a hero who was gunned down in the parking lot of the empire he built, proving the tragic old adage that the most dangerous place for a prophet is often his own home. To understand the tragedy, you have to understand the mission of the marathon. Nipsey preached self-sufficiency. He believed that the only way to stop the cycle of violence and poverty was to own land and businesses. He often walked around the strip mall he had purchased without security, shaking hands, taking photos, and feeling safe among his people. He believed his good deeds were his armor. On March 31, 2019, Nipsey was at his store to help a friend who had just been released from prison get some fresh clothes. It was an act of kindness. Standing in the parking lot was Eric Holder, a 29-year-old aspiring rapper and a known member of the Rolling 60s Crips, the same gang Nipsey had grown up in. Holder wasn't a stranger, he was a familiar face, but familiarity breeds contempt. Witnesses report that Nipsey and Holder had a brief, tense conversation. Nipsey reportedly told Holder that there was paperwork on him, street slang implying that Holder had snitched to the police in the past. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning, a piece of advice from a big homie to clean up his reputation. But to Eric Holder, it was a mortal insult. This leads us to a difficult question about the snitch culture. In the street code, being called a snitch is considered worse than being a murderer. I want to ask you, do you believe that this code of silence destroys communities? Is it rational that a word, just an accusation of cooperating with the law, is enough to justify executing a childhood friend and a community leader? How can a neighborhood improve when the rules of the street value reputation over human life? I want to hear your thoughts on this toxic code of honor. The events that followed the conversation were cold-blooded. Eric Holder didn't pull a gun immediately. He left the scene. He got into his car, ate some fries, and drove around the block. This period of time, the cooling-off period, is crucial. It proves that this wasn't a crime of sudden passion. It was a calculated decision. Holder returned minutes later. He marched up to Nipsey, who was still in the parking lot taking photos with fans. Holder was armed with 2 handguns. He fired multiple shots, hitting Nipsey in the torso. As Nipsey fell to the ground, Holder didn't run away. He stood over the dying man. According to court testimony, Nipsey looked up at his killer and said, "You got me." In a final act of pure malice, Holder kicked Nipsey in the head before fleeing. It was a personal, hateful finish to a senseless act. The man who wanted to buy back the hood was left bleeding on the pavement he owned, surrounded by the clothes he designed. This brings up a painful question about the crabs in a bucket mentality. Nipsey Hussle was the crab that made it out, but he reached back in to help others. I want to ask you, why is it that when someone from a struggling community succeeds, they often become the target of envy rather than inspiration? Was Nipsey naive to think he could stay in the hood without security, or should he have been able to walk freely in the place he was revitalizing? Is the only way to survive success to leave your home behind forever? Let me know your perspective on the dangers of staying local. The aftermath of Nipsey's death was a global outpouring of grief. Los Angeles stopped. Gangs that had been at war for decades, the Bloods and the Crips, organized a unity walk in his honor. It was a moment of peace born from violence. President Barack Obama wrote a letter to his family. The funeral was held at the Staples Center, a venue usually reserved for Michael Jackson or Kobe Bryant. It showed the magnitude of his impact. Eric Holder was eventually arrested, tried, and convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 60 years to life, but justice felt hollow. One man was in prison, but the visionary was gone. The Marathon clothing store became a shrine, then a fortress, and now is closed to the public,
a monument to a dream deferred. I want to ask you about the legacy of the marathon. Nipsey's slogan was "The Marathon Continues." Since his death, his business partners and family have continued his work. Do you believe that a movement can survive without its leader, or was Nipsey the singular force that made it happen? Can his blueprint for black capitalism work without his charisma driving it? There is also the haunting aspect of Nipsey's own intuition. In a tweet just hours before his death, he wrote, "Having strong enemies is a blessing." He saw opposition as a sign of progress. He also rapped extensively about his funeral, about dying young, and about the jealousy of his peers. On the song "Racks in the Middle," released shortly before his death, he rapped, "Die young, legend." It wasn't a prediction of a specific date, but an acceptance of the path he had chosen. He knew that walking the line between the streets and the boardroom was dangerous. I want to ask you a controversial question regarding his security. Nipsey often refused heavy security because he didn't want to look like he feared his own people. Do you think this was a fatal mistake of pride, or was it a necessary part of his authentic image? If he had walked around with armed guards, would the community have respected him less, or would he still be alive today? Is there a middle ground? Nipsey Hussle's death is a scar on the face of Los Angeles. He proved that you can survive the war, but you might not survive the peace. He wasn't killed by the police or the system. He was killed by the envy of a man who couldn't stand to see a mirror of what he failed to become. Eric Holder extinguished a light that was guiding thousands of ships to safety. If this heartbreaking story of the community hero who was betrayed by his own neighbor left you stunned, please hit the like button. Share this video to ensure that the marathon continues in spirit. And make sure you are subscribed for Part 7, where we will travel to the backstage shadows of a music festival in Los Angeles to uncover the story of Draco the Ruler. This is the story of one of the most innovative rappers of his generation, who was ambushed by a mob of 50 people in a secure VIP area, leading to a brutal stabbing that exposed the failure of festival security and the deadly politics of the LA underground. This is the story of the artist who beat the justice system but couldn't beat the mob.
Number 7. Draco the Ruler. We remain in the sprawling, sun-drenched yet shadowed city of Los Angeles, moving from the parking lot of a clothing store to the supposed safety of a massive music festival. The year is 2021. This story is a terrifying indictment of the security theater that exists in the entertainment industry. Daryl Caldwell, known as Draco the Ruler, was a linguistic genius, a rapper who invented his own slang and style, creating a nervous music that captivated the streets. He was a man who had already beaten the odds. He had fought a life sentence in court, defeating a conspiracy charge that tried to criminalize his lyrics, and walked out a free man. He thought the hardest battle was behind him. But on a cold December night at the Once Upon a Time in LA festival, he walked into a trap that no lawyer could save him from. He wasn't killed in a dark alley. He was assassinated backstage in the VIP artist zone, surrounded by security guards and cameras. This is the horrifying account of a coordinated ambush by a mob of over 50 men dressed in red, a stabbing that happened in the heart of a safe space, and the lingering question of how an army of killers got past the checkpoints to silence one of the most unique voices in West Coast history. To understand the horror of that night, you have to visualize the setting. The Once Upon a Time in LA festival was a massive event held at the Bank of California Stadium. The lineup was legendary: Snoop Dogg, 50 Cent, Ice Cube. It was supposed to be a celebration of LA culture. Draco the Ruler was on the bill, a triumphant moment for a rapper who had spent years in solitary confinement. He arrived backstage with a small entourage, including his brother, Ralphie the Plug. The backstage area is colloquially known as the Green Room, a sanctuary where artists relax before performing. It is supposed to be the most secure place in the venue. But at around 8:30 p.m., the sanctuary was breached. A massive group of men, estimated between 50 and 100, flooded into the area. They weren't fans. They were a hunting party. They were wearing red, signaling their affiliation. They bypassed the checkpoints or were let through. They zeroed in on Draco. The attack was not a fight, it was a swarm. The mob engulfed Draco and his small crew. It was a chaotic, violent mosh pit of aggression. In the middle of the frenzy, while security guards reportedly watched or were overwhelmed, a blade was drawn. Draco was stabbed in the neck. It was a precise, fatal blow designed to kill quickly. As the mob dispersed, leaving the rapper bleeding out on the asphalt, the festival continued for a while longer before being canceled. Snoop Dogg and 50 Cent never took the stage. The celebration had turned into a crime scene. Draco was rushed to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead shortly after. The man who had defeated the district attorney could not defeat the mob. This leads us to a furious question about liability. How does a group of 50 gang members get backstage at a major festival with weapons? I want to ask you, do you believe this was a massive failure of competence by Live Nation, the organizers, or was it an inside job where security turned a blind eye? When you buy a ticket to a festival, you assume you are safe. Does this tragedy prove that safety is an illusion even for the stars? Draco's family has filed a lawsuit for negligence. Do you think the organizers should be held financially responsible for his murder? The context of the attack is rooted in the deep, tangled web of LA gang politics. Draco was an independent artist who refused to bow down to established power structures in the streets or the industry. He had enemies. There were rumors of feuds with other rappers who were also at the festival. The fact that the attackers were wearing colors suggests this was a gang-sanctioned hit carried out on a public stage to send a message. It was a crash-out moment, a brazen act of violence that disregarded all consequences. I want to ask you about the crashing out phenomenon. We are seeing more and more instances where people commit life-ending crimes in public spaces with cameras everywhere. Why are criminals becoming so bold? Is it because they no longer fear the consequences, or is the desire for clout and reputation now worth more than freedom? How do you stop violence when the perpetrators don't care if they get caught? The tragedy is compounded by Draco's artistic brilliance. He wasn't a generic rapper. He had a mumbled, offbeat flow and a vocabulary that was entirely his own. Words like flu-flamming and mud-walking. He recorded his most famous album, Thank You for Using GTL, over a prison phone while in solitary confinement. He was an innovator. His death silenced a voice that sounded like no one else. I want to ask you a question about the justice system. Draco spent 3 years in jail fighting charges based largely on his lyrics. He was acquitted, only to be murdered on the outside. Is there a cruel irony that the system tried to lock him away for his art, but the streets killed him for his success? Did the system fail him twice, first by prosecuting him and then by failing to protect him? The investigation into his murder has been slow. While the police have identified the gang involved, convictions have been difficult due to the chaotic nature of the attack and the sheer number of suspects. It's a case of death by 1,000 cuts, or in this case, a mob where individual culpability is hidden in the crowd. It leaves his family and fans without closure, wondering how a festival backstage area could turn into a slaughterhouse. Finally, I want to ask you about the future of live music. After Astroverse and the murder of Draco the Ruler, festivals are under scrutiny. Do you feel safe attending these massive events? Should festivals have airport-style security for artists and VIPs, or would that destroy the vibe? Is the era of the accessible music festival over? Draco the Ruler was a king who fought for his crown in the courtroom and the booth. He proved that you can beat the law, but you cannot beat the lawlessness of a mob that wants you dead. He died as he lived, unapologetically himself, standing his ground against an army. If this infuriating story of the backstage ambush that exposed the failure of festival security left you stunned, please hit the like button. Share this video to demand justice for Draco. And make sure you are subscribed for Part 8, where we will travel to Alabama to uncover the story of Doughboy. This is the story of a rising star with a trademark eye patch who was performing at a club in his hometown when shooters who were already inside the venue opened fire, killing him and innocent bystanders in a jealous rage.
This is the story of the local hero who was betrayed by his own city.
Number 8. Doughboy. We leave the sprawling metropolis of Los Angeles and travel to the heart of the American South, to the historic yet troubled city of Montgomery, Alabama. The year is 2013. This story is a grim reminder that in the rap game, your physical scars are often a map of where you have been, but they cannot predict where you are going. Glenn Thomas, known to the world as Doughboy, was not just a rapper, he was a walking miracle. He wore a signature eye patch over his right eye, not as a fashion statement like Slick Rick, but as a battle scar. He had been shot in the face 3 years earlier and survived. He wore that patch as a badge of honor, a symbol that he was untouchable, that he had cheated death and won. He was the protege of the legendary T.I., signed to Hustle Gang, and was widely considered the next Biggie Smalls due to his laid-back flow and lyrical prowess. He was on the verge of global superstardom. But the tragedy of Doughboy is that he survived the first attempt on his life, only to be claimed by the second. He wasn't killed by a stranger in a foreign land. He was executed in his own city, in a club full of people who claimed to love him, by a man who couldn't stand to see him shine. This is the infuriating story of a local hero who returned home to celebrate his success, only to find that envy is a weapon far deadlier than any gun. To understand the weight of this loss, you have to understand the trajectory Doughboy was on. He wasn't just a local buzz, he was the chosen one of Alabama. T.I., the king of the South, had anointed him. His mixtapes were tearing up the streets. He had a unique look, the bucket hat and the eye patch, that made him instantly recognizable. But Doughboy had a fatal flaw common to many rising stars. He loved his city too much. He refused to leave Montgomery behind. On December 28, 2013, he was booked for an appearance at the Centennial Hill Bar and Grill. It was supposed to be a homecoming celebration, a victory lap for the man who had put the city on the map. The club was packed, the energy was high. Doughboy was in the VIP section, surrounded by fans and friends. He looked like a king holding court. But lurking in the same crowd were men who didn't see a king. They saw a target. The shooting was not a spur-of-the-moment brawl. It was a targeted assassination. According to police reports and court documents, the shooter, Darius Thomas, and his accomplices were already inside the club. They had bypassed security, or perhaps security was non-existent. This wasn't a fair fight. It was an ambush. As the night peaked, the shooters approached the stage area. They didn't exchange words. They opened fire. Doughboy was hit multiple times. The man who had survived a bullet to the eye 3 years prior could not survive this barrage. He collapsed on the floor of the club, his life draining away amidst the screams of the very fans he was there to entertain. But the horror didn't stop with him. The shooters were reckless. They sprayed bullets into the crowd. Kimberlyn Johnson, a 21-year-old university student celebrating her birthday, and Tim Hamilton, a 20-year-old patron, were also killed. They were innocent bystanders, collateral damage in a petty feud fueled by jealousy. This leads us to a furious question about venue security. How does a person walk into a crowded nightclub with a weapon in 2013? I want to ask you, do you believe that club owners and promoters have blood on their hands when they fail to search patrons properly? The Centennial Hill Bar and Grill, formerly the Rose Supper Club, had a history of violence and was eventually shut down by the city after this incident. Is shutting down the venue enough justice, or should the owners face criminal negligence charges for allowing a hit squad to walk through the front door? I want to hear your thoughts on the responsibility of safe spaces. The motive behind the shooting was widely reported as ongoing beef and jealousy. Darius Thomas, who was later sentenced to 85 years in prison, was an acquaintance of Doughboy. They knew each other. This brings us back to the terrifying theme we saw with Nipsey Hussle, the danger of the familiar face. Doughboy wasn't killed by the police or the KKK. He was killed by a young black man from his own neighborhood who couldn't handle his success. T.I. spoke passionately about this at the funeral, condemning the jealousy that plagues the community. I want to ask you a deep question about the crabs in a bucket syndrome. Why is it that in certain communities, seeing someone rise triggers a desire to pull them back down? Was Doughboy naive to think he could hang out in the same clubs he frequented before he was famous, or should he have been able to enjoy his success without fear?
Is the only way to survive fame to completely disconnect from your roots? Let me know your perspective on this tragic social dynamic. The tragedy is compounded by the visual of the eye patch. Doughboy had already paid the price of the streets. He had lost an eye and kept going. He embodied resilience. For him to be killed after surviving that first shooting feels like a cruel joke by the universe. It creates a narrative of inevitability, that the streets were always going to get him one way or another. I want to ask you about the concept of second chances. Doughboy was given a second chance at life after the first shooting. He used it to become a star. Do you think that surviving a near-death experience gives a person a false sense of invincibility? Did he believe that because he survived the first time, he was bulletproof? Or did he know he was living on borrowed time, which is why he recorded music so frantically? The aftermath of his death left a massive void in the Southern rap scene. His posthumous projects showed a versatility that proved that he was destined for greatness. He could do trap music, he could do storytelling, and he could make radio hits. He was often compared to the notorious Biggie Smalls, not just for his size, but for his smooth, effortless delivery. When he died, the potential of what could have been died with him. He left behind 5 children and a legacy of what if. His funeral was a massive event in Montgomery, attended by rap royalty. He lay in his casket wearing his signature bucket hat and eye patch, a final defiant image of the persona he had built. I want to ask you about the impact of collateral damage. We often focus on the famous victim, Doughboy, but Kimberlin Johnson and Tim Hamilton also died that night. Do you think the media ignores the innocent victims in these celebrity tragedies? Does the fact that a university student was killed just for standing near a rapper make you view the glorification of this lifestyle differently? How do we honor the lives of the fans who die in the crossfire? The murder of Doughboy serves as a grim reminder that talent is not a shield. He had the cosign of the King of the South, he had the record deal, and he had the hits. But in a dark club in Alabama, none of that mattered. He was a target. The men who killed him didn't care about his Billboard charts, they cared about settling a score rooted in envy. He was the one who made it out, and for that, he was punished. Finally, I want to ask you about the music industry's role. Labels often sign artists because of their street authenticity and their dangerous backgrounds. Do record labels have a moral obligation to provide security for their artists when they return to their hometowns, or is that the artist's personal responsibility? Could T.I. and Hustle Gang have done more to protect their investment, or was Doughboy simply a grown man making his own choices? Doughboy was the definition of a survivor until the moment he wasn't. He turned a disability, his lost eye, into a trademark. He turned his pain into profit, but he couldn't turn the jealousy of his city into love. He died at 22 years old, a pirate of the rap game who went down with his ship in the harbor he called home. If this infuriating story of the rising star who was executed by his own neighbors left you stunned, please hit the like button. Share this video to ensure that the name Doughboy is remembered not just for the patch, but for the potential. And make sure you are subscribed for Part 9, where we will travel to the trap capital of the world, Atlanta, to uncover the story of Bankroll Fresh. This is the story of a rapper who was recording in a studio when a childhood friend turned into a bitter enemy, leading to a shootout where over 50 rounds were fired, turning a place of creation into a chaotic war zone. This is the story of the studio massacre.
Number 9. Bankroll Fresh. We leave the tragic nightclub in Alabama and travel to the beating heart of the modern hip-hop industry, Atlanta, Georgia. The year is 2016. This story takes us inside a place that is supposed to be a sanctuary for artists, the recording studio. In the rap world, the booth is often called church. It is a place of confession, creation, and safety. But for Trentavious White, known to the streets and the charts as Bankroll Fresh, the sanctuary became a slaughterhouse. Bankroll Fresh was not just another rapper, he was the mayor of the Atlanta trap scene, a charismatic, energetic storyteller signed to 2 Chainz's label. He was known for his hustle, his authenticity, and his potential to become the next global superstar. But on a cold March night, the music stopped. He wasn't killed by a stranger in a robbery gone wrong, nor was he hunted by a cartel.
He was killed by a man he had known since childhood, a man he once called a friend. This is the chaotic, bullet-riddled account of a petty argument that spiraled into a full-scale war zone inside the famous street exec's studio, leaving over 50 shell casings on the floor and a rising legend dead behind the very walls where he made his hits. To understand the magnitude of this loss, you have to understand the energy of Atlanta. It is the Hollywood of the South. Bankroll Fresh was its prince. He had grinded for years, finally breaking through with hits like Hot Boy. He was beloved because he was accessible. He didn't hide in a mansion. He was always at the studio, always working, always accessible to the people. Street Exec Studio was his second home. It was a hub where stars like 2 Chainz, Travis Porter, and Young Dolph recorded. It was supposed to be a secure facility, but on the night of March 4, 2016, the security protocols failed. Or rather, personal history overrode professional safety. A rapper known as No Plug arrived at the studio. No Plug wasn't an intruder, he was Bankroll's childhood friend. They had grown up together, but time and success had soured the relationship. Envy, perceived slights, and the toxic masculinity of the streets had turned a brotherhood into a rivalry. No Plug came to the studio that night not to record, but to confront. The confrontation began with words. Witnesses reported a tense argument inside the studio. It was the kind of petty dispute that happens every day. Ego, jealousy, he said, she said. Security eventually intervened and kicked No Plug out. This should have been the end of it. A door closed, a fight avoided. But in the Atlanta underworld, being kicked out is seen as a sign of disrespect. It is a stain on one's reputation. No Plug went to his car. He didn't leave. He waited. And here is where the tragedy pivots on a single fatal decision. Bankroll Fresh, fueled by adrenaline and perhaps a sense of territorial defense, grabbed a rifle. He didn't stay inside the locked studio. He walked outside to confront No Plug. He fired a warning shot, or perhaps an aimed shot at the vehicle. It was a moment of aggression that shattered the peace. What happened next was not a shootout, it was a massacre. No Plug and his entourage were not unarmed. They returned fire, but they didn't just shoot back, they unleashed a storm. The police report later detailed a scene of absolute chaos. Over 50 shell casings were found at the scene. Bullets flew through the walls, shattered windows, and tore through the studio equipment. It was a war zone in the middle of a commercial district. Bankroll Fresh, despite being armed, was outgunned. He retreated back into the studio, trying to find cover, but a bullet struck him in the hip, traveling upward and hitting vital organs. He collapsed on the floor of the place he loved most, surrounded by broken glass and the smell of gunpowder. The man who had rapped about the trap lifestyle died in the trap he couldn't escape, the cycle of violence with a former friend. This leads us to a furious question about self-defense laws. No Plug later admitted to shooting Bankroll Fresh in an interview, claiming it was self-defense because Bankroll fired the first shot. The police agreed. No Plug was never charged with murder. I want to ask you, do you believe that justice was served? If you instigate a fight, get kicked out, wait in the parking lot, and then engage in a shootout, is that truly self-defense, or is it mutual combat? Does the law fail when it allows a man to walk free after participating in a gunfight that leaves a legend dead? I want to hear your verdict on the legal outcome of this case. The tragedy highlights the specific danger of the childhood friend. We saw it with Big L, we saw it with Nipsey Hussle, and we see it here. I want to ask you, why is it that the people who knew you before the fame are often the most dangerous to you after you make it? Is it because they feel entitled to your success, or because they know exactly which buttons to push to make you react? Bankroll Fresh could have ignored No Plug. He could have stayed inside, but the history between them made him walk out that door. Is pride the ultimate killer of young men? The sheer volume of gunfire, 50 rounds, is terrifying. It suggests a total disregard for human life.
I want to ask you a question about the proliferation of high-powered weapons. How did we reach a point where a studio argument turns into a scene reminiscent of a battlefield? Does the music industry glorify this shoot-first mentality, or is the music just a reflection of a society that is drowning in guns? Bankroll Fresh was a father, a son, and a businessman. All of that was erased by a hail of lead in seconds. The aftermath of the shooting sent shockwaves through Atlanta. 2 Chainz was devastated, posting a heartfelt tribute to his fallen soldier. The Street Exec studio became a crime scene, its reputation forever tarnished. But the saddest part is the loss of potential. Bankroll Fresh was on the cusp of greatness. He had a unique flow, a distinct voice, and a work ethic that was unmatched. He was building an empire. His death serves as a grim reminder that no matter how high you climb, one moment of anger, one bad decision to walk out a door can cost you everything. I want to ask you about the studio environment. Studios are often filled with entourages, hangers-on, and people who are not there to work. Do you think record labels need to enforce stricter no-entourage policies to protect their artists? Should studios be treated like corporate offices where only employees are allowed? Or is the chaotic atmosphere essential for the creative process of hip-hop? Could this death have been prevented with a simple metal detector and a locked door policy? Bankroll Fresh's legacy lives on in his music. His track Walked In is still a club anthem, but every time it plays, there is a shadow over the beat. We are listening to a man who walked into a trap set by his own past. He proves that the most dangerous enemy is not the stranger lurking in the dark, but the friend you grew up with who turned into a stranger. Finally, I want to ask you about the concept of walking away. Bankroll Fresh made the choice to go outside with a gun. If he had stayed inside and called the police, would he be viewed as soft by the streets, or would he be viewed as smart? Is the pressure to look tough actually a suicide mission? How do we change a culture where walking away is seen as weakness even when it saves your life? Bankroll Fresh was the heartbeat of Atlanta. He died defending his territory, his pride, and his name. But in the end, the only thing left was the silence of the studio and the echoes of a talent gone too soon. If this chaotic story of the studio shootout that claimed the mayor of the trap left you stunned, please hit the like button. Share this video to ensure the name Bankroll Fresh is honored. And make sure you are subscribed for the final chapter, Part 10, where we will travel to the gritty streets of Pittsburgh to uncover the forgotten tragedy of Jimmy Wopo. This is the story of a rising star who was assassinated in a drive-by shooting on the exact same day as XXXTentacion, causing his death to be overshadowed by the media, even though his murder was a calculated hit ordered from inside a prison cell. This is the story of the headline that never was.
Number 10. Jimmy Wopo. We conclude our harrowing journey into the world of contract killings and targeted hits, not in a major media capital like New York or Los Angeles, but in the gritty, steel-hardened streets of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The year is 2018. This final story is perhaps the most tragic on our list, not just because of the violence involved, but because of the silence that followed it. On June 18, 2018, the music world was brought to its knees by the shocking murder of XXXTentacion in Florida. The news cycle was dominated 24/7 by the death of the global superstar. But on that exact same afternoon, just a few hours later and 1,000 miles away, another rising king was executed in a brutal drive-by shooting that was just as calculated, just as violent, and just as heartbreaking. His name was Trevon Smart, known to the streets as Jimmy Wopo. He was the undisputed voice of the Pittsburgh underground, a rapper with a distinct, menacing flow who was on the verge of national superstardom. He had the cosign of Wiz Khalifa, he had the millions of views, and he had the charisma. But he also had a target on his back, placed there by a rival gang that wanted him dead at any cost. This is the infuriating and largely forgotten story of a local legend who was hunted down in traffic and assassinated while the world was looking the other way.
proving that in the hierarchy of fame, even death is not distributed equally. To understand the tragedy of Jimmy Wopo, you have to understand the specific energy of the Hill District in Pittsburgh. It is a historic neighborhood, famous for jazz and culture, but also plagued by decades of gang violence. Wopo was the Prince of the Hill. His breakout hit, Elm Street, was an anthem that captured the paranoia and the pride of his environment. He wasn't just a rapper, he was a general in the eyes of the streets. He was affiliated with the 1100 gang, a connection that gave him credibility but also made him a primary objective for his enemies. By the summer of 2018, Wopo was preparing to leave the streets behind. He was reportedly in talks for a major deal with Taylor Gang. He was planning to move his family out. He was doing everything right. But in the underworld, the moment you try to leave is often the moment the door slams shut. His enemies knew he was about to ascend beyond their reach. They had to strike before he became untouchable. The assassination took place in broad daylight, a hallmark of a contract hit designed to send a message. It was approximately 4:22 p.m. Wopo was traveling in a white Mazda SUV through the Middle Hill neighborhood. He was with a friend. They were stopped at an intersection, trapped in the mundane rhythm of city traffic. It was the perfect kill zone. A vehicle pulled up alongside them. There was no exchange of words, no robbery attempt, no warning. The occupants of the passing car opened fire with high-caliber weapons. The white Mazda was riddled with bullets. Wopo was hit multiple times at close range. The shooters didn't stop to check his pulse. They sped off, vanishing into the labyrinth of the city. The police officers who responded found the rapper in critical condition. He was rushed to UPMC Presbyterian Hospital, but the damage was irreversible. At 5:56 p.m., the voice of Pittsburgh was pronounced dead. He was 21 years old. This leads us to a painful and uncomfortable question about the media hierarchy of death. When news of Wopo's death broke, it was barely a ticker on the bottom of the screen on major news networks. The world was too busy mourning XXX Tentacion. I want to ask you, is it fair that the value of a human life is determined by their Instagram follower count? Did the media fail Jimmy Wopo by treating his murder as a footnote to a bigger story? How must it feel for his family to see the world grieving for a stranger in Florida while their son's murder went largely unnoticed by the masses? I want to hear your thoughts on this double tragedy. The investigation into Wopo's murder revealed that this was not a random act of violence. It was a coordinated strike rooted in a deep, bloody gang war. Federal indictments released years later named members of the 1100 gang and their rivals, exposing a web of violence that was orchestrated from the top down. There are chilling allegations that the order to hit Wopo, or the green light, may have originated from individuals who were already incarcerated, proving that prison walls cannot stop a contract from being fulfilled. Wopo wasn't killed for his jewelry. He was killed because he was the head of the snake in the eyes of his rivals. Taking him out was a strategic move to cripple the opposition. I want to ask you about the power of shot callers. If a gang leader can order an assassination from inside a prison cell, does it prove that our correctional system is completely broken? How can we claim to rehabilitate criminals when they are running war rooms from their bunk beds? Does this level of organized crime frighten you more than random street violence, knowing that there are hierarchies and orders involved? The tragic timing of his death, dying on the cusp of freedom, is a recurring theme in these stories. Wopo had signed paperwork. He had the ticket out. He was days or weeks away from leaving the dangerous environment of the Hill District for good. I want to ask you, why does it seem that the streets have a sixth sense for when someone is about to escape? Is it jealousy that triggers the hit when a rival sees you winning, or is it a strategic decision to prevent you from gaining more power and resources that could be used against them? Was Wopo's success effectively his death warrant? There is also the haunting aspect of his music. Wopo's lyrics were often dark, violent, and prophetic. He rapped about shooting at cars, about being hunted, about the very lifestyle that eventually claimed him. Critics often point to this and say he lived by the sword, he died by the sword. But this ignores the environment he was born into. He was reporting live from a war zone.
I want to ask you a controversial question about drill culture. Pittsburgh has a heavy drill scene similar to Chicago. Do you think that music which specifically disses dead rivals and taunts living enemies is fueling these contract killings? If Wopo had rapped about parties and girls instead of Elm Street politics, would he still be alive, or was his gang affiliation dangerous regardless of his music? Can an artist ever truly separate their art from their street reality? The legacy of Jimmy Wopo is one of immense what-ifs. He had a raw, gritty sound that was missing from the mainstream. He had the cosign of Wiz Khalifa, the city's biggest icon. He was supposed to be the next bridge between the streets and the charts. Instead, he became a cautionary tale about the inability to outrun your zip code. His death left a vacuum in the Pittsburgh music scene that has never been filled. The violence in the city spiked in the aftermath, a cycle of retaliation that Wopo's murder accelerated rather than ended. Finally, I want to ask you about the concept of the forgotten victim. Do you think history will eventually give Jimmy Wopo the respect he deserves, or will he always be known as the guy who died on the same day as X? How do we ensure that local legends are honored globally? Does this story make you want to go listen to his music and see what the world missed out on? Jimmy Wopo was a king in his own jungle. He was executed not because he was weak, but because he was strong. He was a threat. He died in a white Mazda, stuck in traffic, a mundane setting for the death of a star. He reminds us that while the world looks at the headlines, the real war is happening in the side streets, claiming talented souls who never got the chance to fully shine. This concludes our investigation into the 10 horrifying cases of music legends killed by contract killers. We have traveled from the frozen apartments of Sweden to the cartels of Mexico, from the studios of Atlanta to the highways of Pittsburgh. We have seen that fame is not a shield. Often it is a target. We have seen that whether it is a cartel boss, a jealous friend, or a rival gang member, the result is the same: a voice silenced too soon. If this series opened your eyes to the brutal reality behind the music industry, please hit the like button. Share this video to keep the memories of these fallen legends alive. And make sure you are subscribed and have the notification bell turned on. We have a massive new documentary series starting next week that digs into the 10 most bizarre disappearances in music history, covering the stars who walked out the door and simply vanished into thin air, never to be seen again. You do not want to miss the mystery.